I have to go ahead.
Good morning. You're listening to WPPM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 103.7 on the dial. This is the BLAINESWORLD show, and I'm your host each Wednesday at 9 a.m. And you can also watch us on WPPM's Facebook page. I'm here hosting the show, by the way, from my beautiful downtown studio in Fairview, North Carolina. And what we do each week, we focus on the Asheville theater scene, as well as on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce a longtime friend, Hanan M. Isaacs, Esquire. Welcome aboard, Hanan.
Thank you, Blaine. It's a pleasure to be with you in North Carolina, although I'm in New Jersey.
Okay, but by the way, you can wave to all your fans and friends in Facebook world if they're watching you. Okay, so.
Hello.
Okay,
Hail.
This is Hanan. And Hanan Isaacs is a mediator, arbitrator, and trial lawyer licensed in New Jersey and New York. He graduated from the UNC School of Law here in North Carolina in 1979. He's a Supreme Court of New Jersey Certified Family Divorce Specialist and an employment law expert representing mostly employees and sometimes management in discrimination, whistleblowing, and retaliation cases. And the question I asked Hanan when I first have a guest on the show is this. As a kid, you grew up where?
North Jersey, Bergen County, right outside of Manhattan.
Okay. And as a kid growing up in North Jersey, did you always know you wanted to be a lawyer?
No, it dawned on me in my mid-teens. I read a book called Anatomy of a Murder.
Okay.
And it so grabbed me. I had not seen the movie, which if anybody wants to see a great old black and white movie with some of the best casted actors in the universe, that's a great one. Anyway, but the theme of it was that they used an obscure law decision in Michigan to fight a murder charge. And I won't give away the plot, but it's very beautifully written and acted. And I thought to myself, there's a place I can really use words and thinking to outsmart the other team, which is what I wanted to do.
And so you then, at that point in time, what did you major in as an undergraduate?
History. I went to Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. I love history. I've always been a history buff. American history, ancient history. Doesn't matter. I remember studying in grad school, because I actually went on to get a master's degree in history, that in the ancient days, and some people say, the word history is his story. And of course, when the feminist movement showed up, they're like, what about herstory? And they weren't kidding. But history at that time was told by men, and it was told by, as they say, the victor, whatever the war was. But here's what they said. You could not trust a source who was older from the event than 20 years. It had to be an immediate observer back at no more than 20 years, or it was considered not credible. And I always love that because, when I do cases, we try cases, we're pulling together history. It's all done through what one doctor once called for me the retrospectroscope. We're looking backwards to see what happened, what caused it. Another iteration of that is Captain Obvious, like Captain Retro. We're going to tell you why the gas tank exploded or the car crash happened. It doesn't seem useful in some ways to anything going forward, but sometimes you got to pinpoint who did what and what was the causation, whether it's medical malpractice, family law, a property dispute. Facts and causation and even expertise actually are vitally, vitally important. So my history degree, well, when I went into law school, I had actually studied legal history before I got there. And when I went in, I took a course in, what did they call that? There's a very fancy word for, the study of legal philosophy and like that. Jurisprudence doesn't mean anybody's being a prude. It has to do with the body of information so that you're actually studying the thing, right? Like you could talk about the history of science. Well, there's something called the history of law. How did we get where we got? One thing I learned in law school, and I've studied this aspect, lawyers and judges don't really care that much about history. They just want to know enough of it to deal with the case in front of them. I will go back and find a case from the Middle Ages if I have to and say, that's where it started. That's the granddaddy right there. And here's how that all developed. And here's why it developed. And that's really lacking in many ways in modern jurisprudence.
Well, it's funny, Hanan, you mentioned that because it reminds me of the history of how I first met you and also how I got you to be one of my first lawyers. And if I can just ask you to revisit that, it had to do with the fact that at the time, I guess I was teaching and I read an article in the local paper, but this guy at a nearby law practice was suing the, what was it, New Jersey Supreme Court, which was kind of, you were a young kid then, right?
I was in my mid-20s.
Right.
And as I look back on it, I'll just say, insane. Right? It's like going to your boss and punching them in the nose. Some people do that. They're really trying to make a point. But here we're in a system that's very hierarchical. It's almost military. And, you know, if you're a private, you don't give the middle finger to the major. It's just not a smart thing to do. But that's what we did. We did it in a polite way. We basically said, look, your law on advertising is inconsistent with federal law now under the First Amendment. And please note that, and we're going to actually go on the air. We had a Florida-based radio ad company that did these fantastic ads. They were all acted with a great professional radio voice. And all we had to do was get a radio guy in New York to finish them for us. At Fellmeister and Isaacs, they'll talk to you in language you can understand. Billy Bob had a handicap of so-and-so in the bowling league until the accident. Now he has a handicap of a different kind.
And
like that.
Laughing, but we're laughing, Hanan. But at the time, you know, you see it everywhere now, but nobody was doing it, at least in New Jersey. And I guess
nobody was allowed to. Absolutely. They used to call them tombstone ads,
right? Because
it looked like a tombstone. It said, a will, $80, a divorce, right. $500, you know, driving under the influence, whatever. So we basically announced to the court that we were going to do it. They sent us a letter through a spokesperson saying, don't do this, because if you look at such and such a case, it says don't do it. And we looked at the case, and the case did not say that. So we wrote back and said, we think you got it wrong. So we're going airborne. And then they served us with a summons to cease and desist and said, every advertisement that you do will be another ethics complaint. This process took 6 years. They sued us. We sued them in federal court. Federal court sent it back to them. We had hearings. We brought in an expert witness from Milwaukee who was an amazing marketer. And ultimately, the court adopted the rule that we asked for, you know, pretty close. We could actually use what are called Madison Avenue techniques.
I remember I was so impressed by that I actually hired you. I don't know if I told you this, but you were the first lawyer who ever drafted a will for me. You know, I said, I didn't know any, again, back to advertising. You weren't advertising it. I didn't see the ad per se, but I read about you in the newspaper. I was so impressed. I said, hey, I got to get a hold of this guy. And that was, I guess in the 1980s, I guess sometime, but you drew, so thank you belatedly for drawing up my first will. I remember, Hanan, at the time, I just said to myself, this guy is pretty impressive, you know? And so ever since then, we've had this kind of friendship relationship for a long time, just from something you did so many years ago to allow advertising of lawyers. So thank you belatedly for that.
Well, yeah, you know, you have to get somebody somehow. And actually, I took some of your classes on marketing, which is a thing that they don't teach in law school.
Right.
It's just not part of the curriculum. You have to learn the business in the trenches. And you were very helpful. And you used to, you know, tell about these ways of doing it. You had a business card with like Brezhnev's phone number, the Pope's phone number. I'm like, this guy thinks big.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too, Hanan, then kind of fast forward that, I also remember we then stayed in touch for some reason all these years. And then I became friendly with you and active with you in the other work you did as not only as a lawyer, but you were also very active in the dispute resolution committee. And I would kind of did some things with you as well in that. And a lot of folks probably even watching and listening don't realize that, hey, you can always hire a lawyer and a lawyer can go to court for you, but there are some other ways a lawyer can help you as well. And why don't you talk a little bit about that?
So the field is called alternative dispute resolution. And sort of one of the telltales, you know, the old thing about you have a fender bender and people stick their head out of the window and go, I'll see you in court. Well, we know this has changed because now people will look out the window and go, I'll see you in mediation. Because in fact, the marketplace, well, where it started was in the labor movement. That was a big part of it, is organized labor saying, we don't need to go to court on these things. We have a custom and a trade in the industry. Let's just keep it in-house. And between us and management, we'll get an arbitrator or a mediator, somebody who could help us work it out in that alternative way. Very, very big corporations, the largest in the country, have provisions in all of their agreements as vendors, as purchasers. If we don't work this out amicably, we're going to mediation. And then we're going to binding arbitration. We will never go to court ever, except to enforce whatever the arbitrator came up with. So common folk look at that and say, well, it's good enough for the bazillionaires. Why should we not be looking at it for ourselves, even in relatively small things? I won't call them small, but they're within your household, perhaps. It could be a family law matter or a small business or a supplier. Now, what's become interesting is over the years, the U.S. Supreme Court is very avid in enforcing these types of agreements when written. So, for example, when you get a box from Amazon and there's a computer in it and there's a packing slip, if you read the packing slip, it says, by the way, A, if we get into a fight, we're going to arbitration, and B, no class actions. And those provisions are being upheld. It happens. Now, this is where there's not a lot of bargaining power by that little person. It doesn't bother me if you and I are having a dispute and we say, let's go to a mediator to facilitate an outcome we can both agree to, or we'll go to an arbitrator who will call the question like a private judge, right? But it does bother me if I go for surgery and before I'm being wheeled in, they hand me a document. You give up all your rights to a jury trial and you sign here and we're going to mediation, assuming you don't die on the table, and then we're going to binding arbitration. This happens today. Every state deals with it in a different way. And ultimately, the Supreme Court has weighed in heavily. And the reason they've done it is because they want to empty their docket. Docket clearance is a tremendous motivation for a court system. So if they've got something that's written and the parties are speaking the same language, right? Let's say English. I mean, if you have someone who doesn't speak English and they've got this box with the, packing slip, maybe they don't have to go. But most people are being pulled into that. So there's a plus side and a minus side. Well, the plus side is everybody gets pretty much served in that universe. The downside is it's one-on-one and it's you versus Comcast or you versus Amazon or whatever. It's a big player against a very, very small player, which makes for
where I think it does help, though, like you said, the small person is what I typically also would advise based on some of my work with you is that if you start a business or run a business, one of the things you want to have is a dispute resolution clause. So if there's a problem in the business, the two people agree beforehand that they're not going to both have to hire lawyers. You can work with lawyers as mediators and arbitrators, but what a great way to first go to try dispute resolution before you go to court.
Yes. I agree. What you're describing is a major distinction that people need to know. Pre-dispute, if we have an arm's length deal and write it down, and we're both going into it eyes open with informed consent, even if there's not a lawyer involved in that drafting process, that's fine with me. And then if somebody wants to back out of that, I'm going to be the first one to say, hey, too bad. This is the deal. It's part of the deal. But I don't like when it's what they call a contract of adhesion, meaning there's one player that's got massive bargaining power and the other one's got none. And then on top of that, it's not that you even signed anything. It says, if you take this thing out of the box, you have signed up. And you're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And you come to find out afterwards what it means. So that troubles me. I think that's not in the spirit of the deal.
And by the way, that's being increasingly challenged, right, in the courts, some of these agreements?
Increasingly challenged and decreasingly successful.
Interesting.
There are states where this comes up, but the overarching principle is that the U.S. Supreme Court is telling everyone under what's called the Federal Arbitration Act, if you go to arbitration, that the states cannot discriminate against arbitration and say, as Alabama had a law that said, you're welcome to arbitrate, but if you don't like the outcome, you can go to court. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, that's not right. You're discriminating against arbitration compared to other contracts. But if the argument is the person doesn't speak or write the English language and they saw the thing, but they didn't know what it was and they didn't understand it, yes, those are worthy challenges. New Jersey does that routinely. But by and large, these dispute clauses are being upheld. Of course, mediation is a different animal. It doesn't trouble me to have people, like, for example, 50 states and the federal system in court, they will mandate mediation. What does that mean? You have to go, but you don't have to settle. And that's pretty important, because if you don't want to, you could sit there with your arms folded and say, fine, bring me my jury. I'm not happy with this. I don't like this. And you get that. You will get that. Arbitration is a different animal. That one says you're forcing yourself to go, both sides, and to be bound by the decision of a third party neutral. So that can sting. You can take a case that might be worth a lot of money in a jury trial setting, and you end up with maybe not so much by the crusty arbitrator who's seen 1,000 cases and isn't particularly persuaded by your pain and suffering.
Speaking to you, Hanan, this is also a history lesson for me as well, because I can't believe how we've gone through all these stages being friends and working together. And so I remember that I had worked with you in several different organizations in terms of neutral third parties, arbitration, mediation. And then I went through a stage where I was getting a divorce. And I said to myself, I can hire a lawyer and I go through that process. And my brother went through the process, 3 years, $50,000 later. He was still not divorced. Well, why don't I call my friend Hanan and ask him about something I had heard about mediation? Could Hanan mediate my divorce? And if you would talk about that process as well, because it was a tremendous service you provided to me and to other people as well. Even though it turned out I couldn't at the very end use you as my mediator because I knew you and my ex-wife didn't want to work with somebody I knew. To describe the process in terms of people having conflict, they can hire a lawyer or they can maybe consider hiring a mediator. Explain the difference.
So you did your intro about me and you said, I'm a lawyer. I'm also a mediator.
Right.
There's no license required. Anybody can mediate a dispute. We do it all the time in life. But when you have a really critical issue in life, let's say the parties are separating, they have children, they have property, there are child support, alimony, equitable distribution principles involved. We sometimes get people who are 2 incomes, no kids, 2 incomes, kids, and a house. Okay, but what if it's 2 incomes, a house, kids, and $2 million over a lifetime of savings, whether it's for retirement or investment portfolio or whatever? This gets very dicey. So the idea of mediation in that setting, which really has only taken hold in the last 40 or so years. And I've been in it the whole time since it really hit the marketplace in North Carolina, in New Jersey, and plenty of other states. The model is, instead of the parties going each one to a separate advocate whose job is to be a zealous representative for just one of them, and what's going to happen is they're each going to talk the language of their client and maybe even be like a very articulate spokesperson for that client. The longer this goes on, the more the fight goes on, the more expensive it gets. So I've heard the complaint, A, divorce takes too long, it costs too much. B, I started out not liking my spouse. Now I hate their guts. And I've spent my kids' college money educating my lawyers' children or grandchildren, which really is not good. And I mean, George Bernard Shaw said it brilliantly in the early 1900s. He said, asking a physician not to cut people is like asking a baker not to bake bread, right? So there's a sense in which I should, for my own financial well-being, be, sending Valentine's cards anonymously to everybody in my neighborhood, right? Get the dissension really going. Or as they say, a town that cannot support one lawyer can easily support two for the rest of their natural lives, right? So the point is, my commitment, and I'm not alone, there's plenty of people, especially the younger folks coming in, who are more idealistic, and they say, listen, let's try to get you settled at the earliest possible time, at the lowest cost. Cooperation works way better than contention. Get a mediator to facilitate between these people who's neutral, has no stake in the outcome. Let the parties get lawyers who are cooperative with each other and with the parties. There's even a field now within family law called collaborative practice. I'm trained in it. It's mediation, sort of, but the lawyers are dedicated to not being the irrepressible advocate for just one. They actually should open their eyes and see what the effect is on the other party and the children. And if they're both doing that and they're taking care of their people and bringing in experts as needed, I like to say it takes a village to get these people divorced. Whether we've got an appraiser or a CPA to come in on what's the lifestyle and what kind of money is needed, cooperation works wonders for people. On the other hand, if you have people who are contentious, or even one of them is, you are going on the longest road with the most ups and downs of, of the, what is that thing called? Like in Brooklyn, they got like the cyclone.
Okay.
Basically, it's like the cyclone. You're going to the top, gotcha. And you're flashing down to the bottom, and it's exciting. But in this setting, you're paying for that ride a million times. I was in a case 2 years ago. I had a small part of it. I was cooperating with an excellent trial lawyer in a case. I was handling custody, parenting time issues, and he had everything else. The counsel fees in that case, Blaine, were $2 million. They sold the marital home to pay the lawyers. They sold the beach house to pay the lawyers. It was like, remember the War of the Roses?
Sure.
Where they're in the fight in the house and they take the cutter, the thing, like the gas engine thing, like to cut the house in half. They cut the house in half. This is what's called a lose-lose outcome. So if there's a catchword for what I'm talking about, it was a chainsaw. If you're looking for a byword here, it's looking for a win-win outcome. That's what this is all about. Find out what's the other party's interests. What are your own? Sometimes people come to the negotiating table, they don't even know why they want what they want. It's just ego or ignorance or anger. So the process, when done properly, the experts, the professionals are there to help people pull out what is it that you want? Why do you want it? and then to move forward from there. So we try that. Sometimes people quit. They just get out and say, I want to have my judge in my trial. They could be right on trial day, and the judge says, could you please try it one more time? And they settle their case. The only difference between day 720 and day 1 is the passage of 2 years and spending a whole lot more money than if they had done what they should have in the beginning. And that's the philosophy. That's not mine alone, but I embrace it. I have for many, many years. It's a better way for people to separate and divorce. A better way for businesses to separate and divorce.
Well, as you said, Hanan, and again, to give you the compliment, is that this is exactly the process you worked with me. In other words, I met with you, you explained mediation to me from a divorce standpoint. You offered to be our mediator. I wanted you to be our mediator. It didn't work out. You helped me get another mediator. But, and this is an important but, you were still available to me every step of the way. And the classic bit of advice, and I quote you at least several times a month, if not more, is that Hanan was then not my mediator, but he was kind of my advocate, and my ex had a lawyer too to advise them. And I remember we're halfway into the process, and I called Hanan, and I was all upset, Hanan, not with you, but the whole process. I said, Hanan, I'm being held up. It was some dollar amount. It wasn't a big dollar amount. And said, Hanan, let's go to court to fight this. And, I want to go to fight it. And you were perfectly willing to do so. But remember your advice. And if you can share your advice with me when a client comes to you with that kind of issue.
Sure. I say it's a business judgment. You have to take a look at how much are you really fighting over and what is the cost going to be to get you what you want. I give that advice 10 times a week. I did it today. I said, if 2 + 2 is 4 and it costs you 1 to get the transaction done, that's still hefty, but it's affordable. But what if 2 + 2 is 4 was after this long drawn out fight and it cost you 10? And like the people who paid $2 million for their legal advisors on both sides, what did they get out of that? They lost everything. That's a lot of anger and rage. Now, there are cases that have to go that way. When there's abuse going on, that's just not being controlled. I can't have my client go to mediation with a bully. And if I have a client who's a bully, I'm not sending the people to mediation. So I know what's going to happen. But then the lawyers can go and see if they can be present and do it. But sometimes you need a whole courtroom to kind of watch that person, with sheriff's deputies who are like, I don't know what Mr. Jones is going to be like today. Sometimes there's psychiatric issues. So sometimes you have to try the case. And when that's true, you got to have a lawyer who's able to do that. So yes, we try the kinder, gentler way, but we always have to be prepared and get ready for that signal event because it may be required. But in your case, you saw reason and you said, well, if it's going to cost me more to fight over the thing, if I can replace it 3 times, whatever it is, the investment, the return on the investment, why should I stick in this? But I said to you, I want to be respectful. This is informed consent. If it's that important to you, I'm not allergic to doing it. I just don't recommend it.
And again, it not only was quicker, easier, but also, again, I won't say it's completely to your credit, but it left us, myself and my ex-wife, actually speaking to each other. It wasn't as bitter as it was going into it, which was a great process.
Absolutely. And you have a child. And I always, and she's now a grown-up person, married on her own. But I had to be concerned about that, as did you, as did your wife.
And 2 final questions. And again, I'm upset because I'm saying that we could go on for about another 3.5 hours here. But the first question having to do with the fact is, if people want to reach you, what's the best bet?
So we have a website, www.kingstonlawgroup.com. It's the town of Kingston, Kingston, Law Group, all one word.com. And our main phone number is 609-683-7400, 683-7400. On the website, you can get an email that will get to me. If you aren't in my service area, call anyway. I'm happy to help you find counsel wherever you may be.
Okay. And the final question is, when do we have the first book? If you haven't written one, but all your experiences and all this wise advice.
You know, Blaine, if I write one, you're going to be my producer, editor, and at least get some acknowledgments in the comments. I have a book about divorce, and you know, the author is this woman, and she thanked her ex-husband. Without him, none of this would be possible.
Okay, well, good line. And keep in mind, when you do write the book, I at least want to write the forward. So as we have our second guest working our way into the studio, and I'd like to thank you for being my guest this first half hour on the Blaine's World Show. It's always a pleasure. Hopefully I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Blaine. Be well.
Okay, buddy, be well. Thanks for being with me. And Ruth, I'll be with you in a second here. Let me say goodbye to Hanan, or I can make Hanan disappear here. And Ruth, just before I introduce you, let me mention to folks that listen to the Blaine's World Show heard here on WPVM. And I should mention that WPVM's mission is to foster community through programming that cultivates dialogue to inform and entertain. The station provides the medium for artists, businesses, community leaders, and nonprofits to share their voice on live radio. Listeners are invited to help support WPVM's efforts by making a tax-deductible contribution, and you can do so by going to the website, WPVMFM.org, and looking at the donate option on the upper right-hand side. My second guest is Ruth Kent, RN, speaker, author, and personal and professional consultant. Bunch of letters after your name, Ruth, alphabet soup here. But you, first of all, can welcome you to the show, and you can feel free to wave to all your friends in Facebook world. So if you're watching, that's Ruth. And I should mention that after 41-year career as an ICU training nurse, her own chronic pain and trauma caught up with Ruth Kent. She was having challenges breathing. She felt scared and hopeless. Committed to finding a solution, she did. Ruth was introduced to energy work that not only led her to wellness, tools helped her discover and break free of limiting things that in her lifestyle. Ruth now brings these same transformative energy wellness ideas, and she brings it to the community. Before we go any further, Ruth, let me ask you, where did you grow up?
I grew up, I'm still working on that, Blaine, but
Join the crowd.
no, I was born and raised in a little town of New Ulm, Minnesota.
Okay. And when you were being raised in that little town in Minnesota, did you always know you wanted to be a nurse?
No. I knew that I wanted to help people, and I knew I wanted to make a difference. I love people. But my sister was a nurse, my brother-in-law was a nurse, my sister-in-law was a nurse, and I was no way going to do what they're doing. Are you kidding me? I'm going into business. I'm not going to, take that from anyone. Well, I had a job, and I was supposed to be like starting out as a hostess and then go to waitress, in this little town. And my dad, I ended up being the dishwasher for this entire restaurant. And when I took on responsibility, I stayed and I worked with it. And it was 7 miles. Now, Minnesota in the winter, 7 miles can make a big difference, And my dad says, "You're not doing that. You're coming home late at night. You're exhausted. This is not the job you were supposed to have." And there was an opening where my sister-in-law was working in the nursing home. And so I said, well, why not? And isn't that usually how, well, not usually, but sometimes where things go, the things you fight the most are the things that you should have done. And I took this job as a intensive care trauma, or as a nurse aide. And I am so sorry about the phone. And I felt madly in love with these patients. And in New Ulm, Minnesota, which is a German settlement, on Sunday, we would have the polka bands come in. And I told the doctors, I said, if you really want to see what is happening here, why don't you come on Sunday? And they go, Ruth, what, you always think, this, and you always think the bads, and I go, hey, just come in on Sunday and be there. And I would get these men and women that literally were in their wheelchairs, and they couldn't walk across the room. But you made eye contact with them, you gave them the support, and before you know it, we were dancing away and just had a great time. So it was 2 years, 3 months, and 4 days that I worked in a nursing home. I know it today.
You were just, what's cool about it, at that time, you were still just a kid, right? Working in this nursing home.
16, yeah.
And then you told me off the air, which is a pretty cool story, that you were actually asked to, I guess, testify or appear before a hearing.
Yeah.
What was that?
They, the people from state that were, overseeing nursing homes for the state of Minnesota, the head of the nursing home and these two individuals, I can vision it like I'm seeing it right now. And they asked me if I would come and be a spokesperson, and an advocate for geriatrics at the state capitol. And like I said earlier, it was like a God wink moment, because I remember turning to him and going, well, would you listen to me? And I'm going, why in the world did I say that? But I knew, I was guided at that point to know that officials, people that are looking, for fact, they're going to want somebody that's educated, that has, money and education behind their name, not somebody with passion. And I can only tell you, as I said earlier, turning 70 this year, passion has done more for me than anything.
Well, so you have this job for 2 years, 3 months, 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
at that point in time, you decided to go to nursing school.
Yeah, it was one of those moments like that. And all of a sudden, deciding, I knew I needed to advance. But in my life, I often lived from the paradigm, I'm not good enough. So and rather than going for RN, I went for LVN. And I went through LVN, and then I graduated and spent 1 year, almost a year, in orthopedics. And somebody saw potential in me and said, why don't you come and see if you can get a job where I work? It was a friend of my cousin's. And I said, well, where do you work? And she said, well, I work in the intensive care. Now, I knew she saw something in me that obviously I didn't see in myself. And that became a goal of mine, is to, stop living with the paradigms and go ahead, step into it. What do I have to lose? Nothing. And I went and I got the job. And after 8 years of working as an LVN in a intensive care trauma area, which is nowadays unheard of.
Sure.
And back then it was very rare as well. And I was getting assignments that I thought my senior nurses would have gotten. In fact, there's one of the very heartwarming. There was a assignment one night. I came in and I was working the night shift, and they said, the head nurse, Joe, said, Ruth, I want you to just wait and I'll give you your assignment later. Okay. So I listened to reports, so I knew what was going on in the unit. And she goes, okay, follow me. And we walked into this room, and she said all about the patient and what he had. He happened to have Guillain-Barré, and he was a young man. And then at the end, she said, I chose you to take care of him. He's my brother.
Oh.
And I went, OMG, And just last week, Monday, a patient that I had in 1996 came to visit me 26 years ago. And this is after I became an RN in 1980. I came from Minnesota to San Diego, and that's in 90. And so I moved to San Diego, and 26 years ago, I was a nurse to this patient. Well, when they came here, anybody living in Nashville, we know Sunny Point, right?
Right, sure.
Well, we went to Sunny Point, and this is just a little side story, but it's so, I'm so grateful for the work that I have been doing in my nursing and the work that I now get to do, that this sums it up. And we went to Sunny Point, and I was going to pay for their lunch, and the husband of my patient walks up and he goes, "Let me tell you something. Let me tell you why you're going to take my card and not hers." And I thought, oh Lord, what's he going to say? And he said, 26 years ago, this woman came into my life and took care of my wife and saved my wife's life. And she was a new diagnosed paraplegic at that time. She was her primary nurse for a month. And the guy behind the counter, he goes, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you just don't win."
No.
The guy that was going to take the card, he looked at me and he goes, "I'm sorry, ma'am."
What a great story. Let me ask you back to a story, part of the story you just told. So the woman who got you into, the field and told you, you should become, this kind of nurse, is she still around?
No, she's not.
So I was going to say, just what a great story. I hope we at least shared it with her at some point in time.
I did.
Okay,
I did.
Great.
I was very blessed to be able to thank her many times.
Oh,
and but that's what people, we know that story about the boat and the plane and, and the guys drowning, Well, the work I get to do now is to connect to that deeper knowing that there is a solution, there is a possibility, there is potential in us, in the world we connect with. And right now, man, is this important.
Well, let's fast forward then, Ruth, as you said. So you had this career in nursing, 41 years. You started at 7, was it, or 8 when you started your career in nursing? You're kidding me here. But anyway, so what made you then, at some point in time, decide not to become a nurse, or I guess you're always a nurse, but stop practicing as a nurse, then get into this energy work that you're into now? What happened?
Actually, I tell people I've extended my nursing.
Great point.
Yeah. And in 2008, okay, so first of all, this energy work became important in my life in 1997. 1997, I was told by multiple physicians, acupuncturists, chiropractors, doctor of nutrition, physical therapists, energy zoning, internal medicine, pulmonologist, rheumatoid specialist, endocrinologist, that I was going to be in a wheelchair on oxygen and probably in 6 years. My back was herniated, compressed, and degenerated so bad that surgery wasn't even an option. I lost the medial and the lateral part of my left leg. And I tried numerous medications. Nothing was working for me. And I wasn't one that would, go hopping and, try it for 3 days and say, well, it's not working. No, I knew that anything had to give at least 3 to 6 months. And I always kept saying mind over body, keep the engine going, the caboose will come, And I was, a couple of years before this, 1997, I was doing half marathons and 150-mile bike ride. And I ate very well. I was at my ideal weight, things like this. And I was looking good on the outside, and I call it my duck in water. I was calm on top and pedaling like hell underneath. My body was in such pain, but nothing was visible to show you why I was hurting. And they couldn't figure out what label to put on me, because my lab work wasn't associating with the pain, and nothing was going together, So I got introduced to a company called Niken that works with energy, magnets, far infrared, water, nutrition. It's all a form of putting your body in the right environment to help boost your innate healing. Well, from there, I met Dr. Nelson. Dr. Nelson is the gifted individual that gave us the emotion code and the body code. And the emotion code and the body code, I became his patient in 1997 to May of 1999. And I couldn't understand it. And I'll be honest with you, Blaine, I'm not sure I really fully understand it now. But I do see miracles every day. And I didn't get the comprehension of it even back then. I thought it was all physical, with every pain, there's a emotion that accompany it. Well, in 2008, I went through bankruptcy, and my husband was going to divorce me. I was going to divorce him. We were in agreement. Well, this work saved my marriage, and it also brought me from bankruptcy to debt free. It removed the paradigms and the blocks. And my husband and I, I can't remember what year it was, but for our anniversary gift, I called Dr. Nelson up. It was after 2008. And I called him up and I said, would you do a session on me so that you could clear whatever it is I'm bringing that into the relationship? I read the book Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud, and I knew accountability. And so I was taking accountability that I knew I was angry. I knew I was frustrated. I want to get rid of some of that so that I could come with love to make sound decisions, love to be, in the right place in what was moving forward. And I didn't have to like everything, but I had to come from the heart, not the head. And 2 days after the session, all of a sudden, my husband, who was very analytical, black and white type, quite different than I was, and all of a sudden he looked at me and he said, "Is there something different about you?" And I thought, wow, this stuff is really good. And about a month later, he was standing at my desk or sitting at my desk, and I was standing, and all of a sudden that inner voice said, "You can show him the session now." I picked up, it was smack dab in front of me. God, universe knows that, So I picked it up and I handed it to him. And normally he probably would have looked at it and said, "Yeah, what's this about?"
Right.
But he looked at it and it was like he was reading every letter. And he handed it back to me and he said, "You really love me, don't you?"
Oh, sweet.
And the last 2 years of our marriage, we renewed our wedding vows. And why is this important? Well, suddenly I took him in for a heart cath, January 3rd, 2017, and he didn't come out. It was just one of those situations. But this work helped me to take that catastrophic situation and have the courage to ask the question, "Lord, help me to know what I'm grateful for." And immediately I heard he didn't suffer. That's all I wanted for him. And that moment has helped me to move on and to live a life that, he probably would have kicked my butt if I wouldn't have done.
Well, talk about this, Ruth, in terms of, I'll put you on the spot here. If you
Yeah.
can, so I kind of get the story, and I'm so impressed with the change in your health and mental well-being, all that. But what then triggered you to then decide this is the field for you, and you're going to be, I guess you would call yourself an energy healer, or you had a better title before off the air. What did
Yes.
you call yourself?
Yes, your abundant accelerator.
I love that. How'd you come up with that?
It was a divine drop in. Yeah, I really don't do a lot of thinking anymore, which is real nice. Yeah.
But
And
so if I work with
what-
you then as my abundant accelerator, what does that mean?
Well, I love listening to patients. I love listening to clients. I love listening, but I also want to listen to your heart. Where do you want to go? What is it that you truly want? You know, I was listening to your interview with Hanan, and you know, we do similar work in different tools because we want to help the people get to the core of the problem. Now, the interesting part, most of the situations at the core of our problems are in our subconscious files. 70% of who we are and how our habits, our beliefs are imprinted on our brain by the age of 7 years old. Also, so much of this can be inherited, from disease mishaps to behavioral problems, many things, to relationship with money can be an inherited situation. Now, how I do this is through muscle testing. First of all, I ask for the help from the source, divine, and then I use muscle testing. And then I simply, you can take your hand or you can take a magnet and ask to release it and hold the intention at that moment. And I was working the other day with a new client. She's a vet, disabled. And in one session, her not only did her pain level go from 5 to 6 down to nothing, her migraine that she was starting to get went away. But she said, I feel a sense of happiness that I don't know if I've felt in a long time. And I feel a sense of hope. When we can start each day forgiving yesterday, forgiving the past, and start each day with a new beginning, with a new sense of hope, love, faith. You see, the work helps in different areas, but one of the greatest joys that I see is when it really connects the individual to their true potential, to their true possibilities, and the freedom to be all that they can be.
Yeah.
And many times go ahead.
No, I was going to say, very exciting about what I hear you saying is that the nice thing about this, it's not, it's all kind of external. There's nothing you have to,
There's no side effects.
You're not taking, exactly, you're not taking medicine, you're not getting operations, but you're working, I guess, with you or the healer or whatever you want to call yourself.
Well, and I have been blessed to work with joint, efforts, like with chiropractors, acupuncturists, naturopaths, even some doctors. There are doctors that come to me as well. And, I love it. I believe we're all here to help each other to rise. And, I'm not against Western medicine. I believe there's a place for everything, but there's so much that we could be teaching the people, helping the people to know. I can teach a 3-year-old how to do the emotion code. It's not that hard. It takes willingness and openness.
How long does the process take?
On my website, you can get certified in the work, and it takes for the emotion code 6 months, and then for the body code 6 months.
By the way,
you don't have, it's an online program.
Since you mentioned it, could you give your website if folks want to find out more?
I would love to. And it's www.ruthkentllc.com.
Okay, so that's really easy. I'll ask you to repeat it. Ruth, repeat it if you would.
RuthKentllc.com. And you can connect through me. You can do a 15-minute free consultation. And something also that I do one-on-one sessions. I do one-on-one sessions with people all over the world. Some people have a hard time thinking distant healing. I said, just if somebody sends you love, just if it's not going to stop because you're in the next state, So, and then also I've created 2 programs. And the first program is Champion Your Truth. And it's a 12-week program that's starting January 3rd. And I'm also doing Quantum Leap Results with Ruth.
I love it. Great title.
And yeah. And so actually that's January 2nd, and this one's January 3rd. And it's, a wonderful way of coming together and elevating each other up in your journey together.
So I hear you saying there, I guess, 2 ways to work with you. One, you can go to the website, and you mentioned kind of interesting that there are these 2 courses there that people do on their own. Is that how it works?
That for certification,
Right.
for the emotion code. That's on there.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then they can also work with you, I guess, individually.
Yes, but the programs that I do, this is together. We're on Zoom every week for 12 weeks together. There's 2 different, this is different than the certification. These are actually programs that I've created to help people go through their paradigms to get to the other side and to blossom into their brilliance.
Okay. It must be very exciting for you then when somebody goes through the program, when you see the shift or you see the change. And do you see that often?
Every day. We don't have time, but I could read you testimony after testimony, and one of the things going into your own business, when you're in the hospital, you have immediate gratification. I thought I didn't have that. No, I do. Every day I get to read, I get to see from someone the blessings that, this has brought to their life.
What's the telltale sign that somebody needs to see or read to know that they need to work with somebody in an energy practitioner? What tells me that I should be working with you?
I'll be honest with you, and I'm not being smart, but the first comment that came to my, are you breathing? because we are emotional creatures. You can live in blindness and deafness, or you can get to really, be open and have the courage to find out what else is there. Say yes, and yes, this about yourself, but yes, and I recently have given my first public speaking. Writing a book, and this is all from a little girl in 2nd grade that couldn't stand up to read hardly. There's more in us.
So you mentioned your first book. Tell me about that.
Well, okay. There was a Heal Thyself is one of the books. Nurse Sparks is another one. And then I wrote the foreword, but I'm writing my own book, and it's The Blame Epidemic. Imagine life without blame. And what's interesting about that book is that I have many people wanting to buy it, and I haven't even got it written yet. So, and it's not that I know everything about blame. That's not what I want. I want you to see the other side. And blame is destructive. Let's blossom. There's potential in everyone.
And if somebody decides to get into this field, I guess there are a couple of different ways. One, they could schedule an appointment with you on a one-on-one basis. 2, I hear you said you have these Zoom groups going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an ongoing thing?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And how many people typically in a group?
I like to keep it small because I want to, have the time and the respect of each other. I would say 6 to 8 at most.
Okay. And very exciting. And then the third thing, they can go for certification if they want to go forward in this field through you. And Ruth, again, I'll ask you to repeat one more time. If folks want to get information about you or the courses, find out how to contact you, the best bet is what?
www.ruthkentllc.com. And also, I'm going to give out my text number, and you can text me because sometimes it's difficult to computer land. And that's 828-778-0254.
Okay, I'd like to thank you, Ruth Kent, for being my guest the second half hour on the Blaine's World Show. Hanan Isaac's my first guest, and Amy Presnash, my producer. Thanks for being with us, Ruth. Speak to you soon.
Bye-bye.